Excellent. बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम। हम आज की तकरीब का बाकायदा आगाज करने जा रहे हैं। Today, it's a kind of remarkable event for us to launch, I guess, Pakistan's first ever human security report in Pakistan, which is having a detailed human security index of last 2 decades almost. FES is co-hosting this event today, and Dr. Pasha, he himself is with us. And on behalf of FES, Frederick Ebert Stiftung, I would request its country director, Dr. Niels Hegewisch, to come here and give his opening remarks. Dr. Niels, over to you.
Thank you, Abdullah, and good morning to everybody. Thank you for joining us here at this extraordinary moment when, as Abdullah said, Pakistan's first ever comprehensive report on human security is launched. There are too many distinguished guests in this room, so that I could welcome everybody of you individually, but I hope you'll forgive me for that. Let me say to my colleagues, excellencies, and distinguished representatives of the government, thank you for being here, thank you for listening to the presentation, and thank you for engaging in the discussion on the findings of the presentation. I would also like to extend my heartfelt welcome to all our distinguished panelists. Some of them have traveled a long or even a very long way, so we are very much grateful for them to being here. My special gratitude goes, of course, to Dr. Hafiz Pasha. He's a long-standing friend of FES, and we are very happy for joining him in person to this event. And we have been working with Dr. Pasha for decades already, I think, on the shared values, on the shared beliefs that we also as FES, as an organization, believe in, which is freedom, social justice, and solidarity, the basic fundamentals of social democracy. And this has been a guiding star for our cooperation with Dr. Pasha, and you can also see this in the Human Security Report. Let me also take the opportunity to welcome Professor Alia Hashmi-Khan, former Dean of Social Sciences at Quaid-e-Azam University, and also a very old and very dear friend of FES. Dr. Hamza Ali Malik, Director of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission on Asia Pacific. He had, I think, the longest journey for us. He's coming from Thailand, so we're very happy to welcome you here. Rana Kaisari-Shake, Assistant Resident Representative of the UNDP in Pakistan. Dr. Zainab Shehan, Chairperson, Department of Economics, Fatima Jinnah Women University, with whom we also, with you at the Jinnah University, we also have worked in the past. And Mr. Ali, he's our Chief of Research at Business Recorder. We have a very interesting panel that will probably give us a very enlightened discussion on the presentation we are going to hear soon by Dr. Pasha. FES, as I have pointed out already, is a German political foundation. We are committed to the values of social democracy. We have been named after the first democratically elected president of Germany, Friedrich Ebert, and we are working in more than 100 countries globally. In Pakistan, we have been working for almost 40 years, 30 years of it with an office on economy, labor rights, civic education, and regional connectivity. I strongly believe that the report on human security in Pakistan comes at the right time. In the past few years, Pakistan faced economic crunches during the outbreak of the global pandemic. And in the year 2022, we saw the worst natural disaster in the form of floods, which cost the country's economy over 30 billion USD. We all are very well aware of that. Consequently, Pakistan has witnessed a big increase in unemployment and poverty, leading to a big decline in human security. We sincerely hope that this publication will be taken up by policymakers, economists, law enforcement agencies, and by parliamentarians and the leadership of all political parties in Pakistan, who are currently, I believe, preparing their election manifestos. And I think these kind of studies, these kind of findings should inform the party manifestos for the upcoming elections. Hopefully, it will be a constructive contribution to enhance the awareness of the concept of human security and to demonstrate how a progressive and workable reform should look like. May it be of good use to Pakistan and help reducing the real pain of ordinary people and build a new consensus to overcome the country's social and economic challenges. I'm very grateful for Dr. Pasha to now give us the introduction into the study and its findings, and looking forward to discussing this with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Niels. Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Niels. We are having like our distinguished speakers. I just want to give a quick introduction, as Dr. Niels has already mentioned. We are having Professor Dr. Alia Hashmi, whom I call my teacher. And she has been, again, one of the very oldest friends of FES and have been engaged with us since last many decades. Dr. Hamza Ali Malik is the director at UNESCAPE, Thailand. Rana Kesar Isaaq Saab, the assistant resident representative of UNDP, will be joining us shortly. And then Dr. Zainab Jahan, the chairperson of economics department at Fatima Jinnah Women University, and Mr. Ali Khizar, chief of research from Business Recorders. So the quick background is, which Dr. Pasha will be definitely discussing. I want to shed a little light on it. In 2022, the announcement of the national security policy for 2022 to 2026 was a landmark policy decision by the government of Pakistan, which represents a significant step forward from the traditional notion of security as defense and then military preparedness and sovereignty. The focus now in the policy is to take a holistic approach and include human security and the well-being of citizens. So how to make the security policy a citizen-centric policy. And I'm glad, and it is a big honor to have Dr. Pasha with us in person. I would now request Dr. Pasha to share the key findings of his study. And before I invite the other distinguished speakers, I want to announce that each speaker will be given 5 to 7 minutes, but Dr. Pasha is, will be requiring more time to explain that big thick book as quick as possible. Dr. Pasha, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ladies and gentlemen, my co-participants in the discussion session, and let me say that this is a wonderful opportunity. And, this is my first step out of what has been a period of convalescence for me. I went through a surgery, and I thank God Almighty that I'm here today and I'm able to make a presentation to you. And I have with me some of the finest colleagues and intellectuals of our country with us today. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me start by saying that what Abdullah has identified is really been the primary motivation for the research, which has, I must say, been supported duly and completely and wholeheartedly by the Frederick Ebert Stiftung Foundation. This is a foundation that I have worked with over the last almost 2.5 decades. And let me say that it stood by people like us when we stood up against the military takeover at the end of the previous century. Thank you for that kind of support at a difficult period in the country's history. We have always fought for the values of social democracy. This is what we believe in, and we have stuck by it throughout our lives. So I am very happy that we are now beginning to broaden. You see, traditionally, the United Nations has focused on the concept of what is called human development. Now, this is a somewhat narrow concept, if you like, although it has been a very useful concept, and it focuses on income, on education and health status of the people of the country. And every year in the Global Human Development Report, UNDP publishes the global rankings. Here I must convey to you some unfortunate news that in the last Human Development Report of 21-22, unfortunately, Pakistan slipped from medium to low level of human development. This is indeed a tragedy. A country which has now a population of 241 million, and traditionally, at least in the earlier part of this century, had been one of the leaders in South Asia, today has fallen behind, unfortunately. And it was important now that we focus on the broader dimensions of the economic, if you like, downhill path of our country. And that is why I decided to focus on the much broader concept of human security. And you'll be amazed, there are something like 5 or 6 indicators in the Human Development Index of the United Nations. Our index, Human Security Index, has 87 indicators. 87 indicators. It is an extremely comprehensive index of the state of the lives of the people of a particular country. So let me now quickly move on to the main presentation. It's not working.
ये कोई असिस्ट करेगा कि प्रेजेंटेशन की स्लाइड मूव नहीं हो रही, रिमोट जो दिया हुआ है जी डॉक्टर साहब भी देखिए कर रहे हैं काम
No,
रिमोट नहीं काम कर रहा, आप नेक्स्ट करते जाएं.
this is not the usual German efficiency.
No, it is because you mistaken.
Pakistan, we given up, but I thought the German efficiency would prevail.
No, आप लीड ले लें फैसल, उनकी टीम कोशिश.
Okay, I will just click like this, and you please then move. We are back to the normal cultural characteristics. Okay, now, ladies and gentlemen, what is human security? I must say that this is a wonderful opportunity for me to dedicate and acknowledge the contribution of one of the finest economists of Pakistan, Dr. Mehboob ul Haq. Dr. Mehboob ul Haq eventually joined the United Nations, and he was the father of the Human Development Index. But earlier on, he had been working on a broader concept of human security. And in this, he was supported by the Nobel Prize winner, Amartya Sen. So I want to dedicate this. He has been a source of inspiration for this work. And I have essentially visualized the concept initially as was developed by Dr. Mehboob ul Haq. Dr. Mehboob ul Haq said that we have to focus on the security of the people, not territory. And that is what distinguishes the concept of military or defense security from people's security. And this is a point which was made earlier by Dr. Niels. The other is that security should be achieved through development, not through arms, which again has this military connotation. The United Nations, in its initial work, has identified human security as being a universal, people-centered, and prevention-oriented. The concept of human security in its broadest form, and this is the form that we have used in operational terms to quantify the trend in human security in Pakistan, we have focused on 4 dimensions of human security. The first is freedom from fear. The second is freedom from want. The third is freedom from inequality and oppression or exploitation. And the fourth is access to the domain broadly of human rights. So this is a broader concept. Much of what the human development focuses on, as I said, is particularly on the first 2 dimensions to some extent, but not even entirely. Now, I must give due credit to an institution that I worked closely when I was the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations many years ago, is UN ESCAP. And here we have one of the brains of UNESCAP sitting. UNESCAP developed a Human Security Index for Asian countries in 2010 with 11 components. And it was a first pioneering work. And I must say that it would have been wonderful if we could have carried on with this work over the next many years. Then there was in construction of an African Human Security Index by the UN Trust Fund for Human Security. The UN Trust Fund for Human Security was established by the leader of the cabinet in the United Nations, where I had the pleasure of sitting in, Kofi Annan. Kofi Annan was actually very, very focused on issues of human security. And that is what had led to the formation of a trust fund. And by the way, the trust fund has just sent out a request for a proposal. And I think we should perhaps talk to UNESCAP about the possibility of doing an Asian Human Security Index. The first national security policy of Pakistan, I was a trifle disappointed, although it has got the right dimensions and the right approach, that somehow it would have been nice if it had said the first national human security policy of Pakistan. But that was perhaps treading too far, given the traditional and the prevailing view on the notion of security as being essentially driven by considerations of defense and military security. This already was a major step forward to call it the National Security Policy. This has been announced, as was highlighted earlier, in January 2022 for the period 2022 to 2026, and it articulates a citizen-centric national security framework and places economic security at the core of national security. And its thematic sections include the following: ensuring equality, securing the economic future rather it should have been, defense and territorial integrity, and I'm sorry, you'll have to. Internal security, foreign policy in a changing world, and it does have human security. So I'm glad we should applaud the fact that the notion or the concept of human security does get incorporated in this first security policy. And in that respect, we congratulate our government. And one of the key people behind this is Dr. Muiz Yusuf, who is Vice Chancellor of my university. He was the advisor to the Prime Minister who prepared this national security policy in 2022. And as I've said earlier, this policy provides the motivation. We want to now quantify it and show what's happening over time, which are the plus areas, which are the negative areas, and what are thereof the implications for national reform agenda. So now let me move to the hardcore of the research. In this 4 dimensions or 4 components of the Human Security Index, and by the way, this is the first time this methodology has been developed anywhere in the world. And it has 23 subcomponents. And as I have said earlier, within those 23 subcomponents, there are 87 indicators. You can imagine the amount of data analysis and data searching my team had to do. And I must acknowledge the wonderful work that was done by a team. I have one of them sitting here, Rizwanullah. Yes, he was the database manager. Well done. And then we have the Human Security Index, as was indicated by the director. It has been constructed for 2 decades, for the full 2 decades, from the beginning of this century to 2021-22. We were unfortunately or fortunately not able to reflect fully the damage due to the floods, because the GDP estimates by the government of Pakistan and the Pakistan Bureau of Statistics there are 3 stages in the finalization of the GDP estimates. At this point in time, we are at the preliminary stage. Next year, we will get to the provisional stage, and then finally, year after that, we will get the final estimates of the GDP growth in 2022-23. I wanted to be careful because I didn't want to artificially depress the index. So we stop before the floods, but we do fully incorporate the impact of COVID-19. That is very much a part of the trend analysis. What are the components of the freedom from fear? The first one, of course, is external financial vulnerability. Now, this is of particular importance for countries which are somewhat perilously placed in terms of their financial relationship with the rest of the world. And Pakistan, as you know, is a country which has been more or less almost permanently in an IMF program, and is today in a 23rd program and is in a state of great financial difficulties. So this is a very, very important addition to human security. God forbid, if a country defaults. For example, Sri Lanka defaulted. 9% decline in GDP, 72% rise in prices in 1 year. I mean, that's the kind of damage that can be inflicted on a country, God forbid, if it defaults. Our reserves today are just about 1.7 times our imports, and there is the inflow of external finance, including from the Honorable World Bank, has trickled down very substantially. And the end result is that external financial vulnerability indicator is of primary importance to Pakistan in terms of the insecurity dimensions people could face in this country and are already facing currently. Then, of course, we have the traditional notion of security, which is territorial security, which we have included as one of the indicators of freedom from fear. A very, very important one now, environmental protection and natural disasters. And we have gone out of our way to include the implications of climate change and of other types of natural disasters, including in the Pakistani context, the problems we are having with the environment, the smog and so on and so forth. And then we focus on personal safety, which is crime, and of course, personal safety at work, which is very important. About 2 to 3% of our workers get either diseased or injuries during work. And this is important that we capture it. And finally, health hazards and diseases, and nothing more important than COVID-19 being captured in that indicator. The total number of indicators in this group of components for freedom from fear is 27 out of 87. Next. This is a very comprehensive indicator of freedom from want. It has almost 9, it has in fact exactly 9 dimensions, and took us a long time to construct the database for it, but we were able to do so with considerable effort, based not only on the Pakistani database, but here I must also thank the World Bank's database on world development indicators. It's a very useful development database. And there are others also more specialized here, including those of the UN agencies. So we have here income, shelter, education, food security, energy security, women, employment and wages, health, and children. And here we have the majority of indicators, 44 out of 87 indicators. Next. For us, this is a very important indicator. And you know, Pakistan of late, fortunately, as a result of the work partly done in the United Nations Development Program, Human Development Report of 2020, the issue of inequality has finally surfaced in a big way in Pakistan. And there is even now admission that there's an extent of state capture by the elite. And that is why it is very important for us to focus on income and expenditure inequality, because the average may look good, but there may be a large proportion of the population which is insecure because they are at the lower end of the inequality scale. And then we have regional disparities, and of course, the ultimate indicator of human security, the level of poverty and gender inequality. The total number of indicators is 11. Components of good governance and access to rights, there are 5 of them, and these are based on international indicators, and they include governance, economic freedom, democracy, and corruption perceptions. So this is basically where we have got the comprehensive human security index, which has 4 dimensions, which has 87 indicators. Let me now quickly present the results to you. Next, please. The position with regard to the indices is wherever you see a red indicator value for 2020 to 22, the latest year, that is a problematic area where there has been a deterioration in the level of human security. And here you will see that territorial security of Pakistan has been somewhat diminished, external financial vulnerability massively down. And this is perhaps the biggest decline in any indicator. Personal safety, more or less unchanged, slightly declined. Health hazards, fortunately, although there was the impact initially of COVID-19, but there has since been a strong recovery by Pakistan on the health end, one of the best in South Asia. And then, of course, environmental protection, we have gone down. So the overall index of freedom from fear is somewhat down in relation to the level almost 20 years ago. Next. Want is somewhat better indicators. We have some better values here. And the only 2 areas where we seem to be slipping a bit is food security. In fact, over the last 2 years or so, the rise in food prices has been substantially higher than the overall rate of inflation. Last year, food prices went up by 41%. And the people of Pakistan today really face a major problem of minimum levels of nutritional consumption. And then, of course, we have the energy security. And Pakistan, if I can say, if there is a black hole in Pakistan's economy today, that black hole is the energy sector of Pakistan. It is unbelievable how much that we have had to contend with in terms of rising prices and unbelievable levels of losses in the power sector and gas sector. Overall, the index of freedom from want shows some significant increase, and I'm pleased that that is the case. It could have been more, but it's definitely one of the more positive areas of human security. Next. Inequality. Income inequality, fortunately for Pakistan, had been declining, but over the last couple of years or so, particularly in the more recent period, it has tended to increase once again. The more recent evidence highlights that. I'd like to particularly focus on regional disparities. They are down. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the greatest threats to human security in our country is the divergence in the development among the 4 provinces of Pakistan. And the biggest worry that I have watched this over the last 30 years, and I've got 2 of my students to do their PhDs on regional economies. The biggest problem is Balochistan. Ladies and gentlemen, you will be amazed. Way back over 20 years ago, Balochistan had a per capita income close to Punjab and above Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Of course, Sindh has always been, in per capita income terms, the number one. So the ranking was Sindh, Punjab, Balochistan, and KPK. Over the last 20 years, particularly due to migration within the country, and very importantly, due to international migration of people from KPK, KPK has caught up. This is a new finding. The province of KPK is now very close in terms of per capita income because it accounts for 30 to 35% of remittances to the country, both internationally and domestically. And it has moved ahead. And today you have a situation where Balochistan, which used to have a per capita income just 5 or 10% below the national average, 20 years later, it is now almost 30 to 35% below the national average. And we will have to focus. I'm saying this particularly because of the increased incidents more recently in acts of terrorism and so on. And some of the roots of that you have to recognize. Poverty, Pakistan's poverty level in the more recent past, particularly after 2010, has tended to worsen a bit. And this is reflected here in this indicator. Gender inequality has tended to improve somewhat, particularly in terms of the ratio of literacy and school participation, and also to some extent in labor force participation rates. Although the gap in absolute terms is still very large, in relative terms, it is moving together. At least there's a positive trend in this gender inequality, although there's still a long way to go before we have absolute equality. Move on. So this is basically good governance and access to rights. Please move on. Now, this is the bottom line, ladies and gentlemen. And we have here the bottom line that two indices have improved, two indices have deteriorated, and overall the situation is that Pakistan's overall index of human security is low in absolute terms. It did improve from 2001 to 2015-16, but in the last 6 years or 5 years, it has actually tended to decline. And what is truly worrying is that it stands today close to the level of human security 20 years ago. I mean, this is something which has to be highlighted. And we have to indicate that Pakistan's, and you know, the tragedy is that the Human Development Index also has a similar trend. There's been little or no improvement in Pakistan's Human Development Index in the last decade. So now let me move on and tell you some of the extensions. Just carry on, move on, because I need to save some time. Move on. Just a moment here. The red ones are the ones which have been highlighted as the problem areas where we need to focus our efforts in terms of the reform and policy mix in the years to come. Territorial security, financial vulnerability, environmental protection, food security, energy, income inequality, regional disparities, corruption perception, and poverty. So when I come later to my second half of the presentation on the policy side, we'll tend to focus a bit more on these areas. Next. I have done the Human Security Index along with my team for 11 countries. And it turns out, I'm sorry, for 12 countries. And it turns out that Pakistan's ranking is very low, but instead of being at the bottom, it's just 2 places away from the bottom. That's the only slight improvement. Next. Move on. Move on. This is very important. The Provincial Human Security Index. You see, somehow or the other, there is a tendency in Pakistan not to focus down to the provincial level. Almost intentional. Do you know, for example, India is a federation like ours. Since 1996, India has been producing estimates of regional GDPs consistently. 31 states or so of India. Pakistan, only 2 PhDs from my students, Dr. Bengali, and more recently another. But that's not official. How can you plan in a federation at the state level if you do not have the estimates of the economy and its growth performance? The reason why this is not done is because it might reveal inequality. But for God's sake, that is the whole idea. If inequality is revealed, you go and take corrective actions against it. No, that is not being done. I have tried many, many times to promote this preparation. The other area which finally the IMF picked up, and even then today we have no progress as per the commitment to the IMF in the standby facility. Pakistan was asked to prepare a quarterly GDP estimate. India has had quarterly GDP estimates since God knows 50 years. Surely you need quarterly GDP estimates because it gives you a chance to take early actions. No, there is a conditionality in the standby facility that by the end of November, Pakistan's PBS will present a set of quarterly national and regional income accounts. National income accounts. It hasn't been done. And I'm going to make a suggestion here to all those who are participating that if the government does not, let us work together and produce a quarterly series. We will want to do that with the help of the UN and others. In fact, the UN statistical system is the one that is generally used for this purpose. So what is the bottom line as far as the provincial HSI, Human Security Index, is concerned? Have a look at this. Which is the province which is 4th in every indicator index? Balochistan. And which is the province which does well, and Punjab does well in inequality? Number 1, Sindh does well in freedom from fear, from want, and somewhat better in governance. And Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is coming now in the intermediate range, 2nd or 3rd. This is a very important chart because it highlights the gap between the 4 provinces of the country. You have a situation where Sindh is 0.485 and Balochistan is as low as 0.307. This is extremely worrying. Next. Carry on. Yes, now I come to this and some indications of the policy area. I have another 6-7 minutes. Yeah. Okay. Move on. Reducing external vulnerability. I'm afraid Pakistan will have to go ahead with another IMF program, as has already been indicated to us by the current incumbent finance minister, and various other measures will have to be taken. Move on. We have prepared in this human security book a kind of a charter on the need for a broader political consensus on the implementation of major structural reforms with a focus on inclusive growth, leading particularly to higher human security. Next. This is the financing plan, and believe it or not, behind this financing plan, there are specific reform proposals in great detail. I don't have the time because I'm limited to 40 minutes. But if you look at the book, there is a chapter which indicates in precise terms exactly what needs to be done to increase the tax to GDP. Move on. I'll just show you. Look at this. We have done exact quantification and identification of reforms. How many people do this in our country? We just talk at the upper level, itna bada do. But this is a practical, based on careful analysis of the laws of the economy and so on. And we have come up with a set of major proposals which can generate over 2.25% of the GDP as revenues. That is 2,250 billion rupees as of today's GDP. Next. And then we focus on, this is the indirect tax reforms, move on. Non-tax revenue reforms, move on. Expenditure containment reforms. And this leads to the revenue base and the expenditure savings create fiscal resources for interventions in the realm of human security. You know, for example, let me give you one simple statistic. Do you know what the poverty gap in your country today is after the inflation that we have seen in recent years and the loss of employment? Conservatively, the poverty gap of Pakistan today is 2,250 billion rupees. And do you know what is the size of our social protection cash transfers program? 400 billion. We're trying to raise it to 460. We are catering hardly to 1/5 of the requirements, unfortunately. Now, if we were to get that additional 2,500 billion, we can go in for targeted transfers, we can go in for employment promotion, we can go in for children's education, we can do all sorts of things. So it's extremely important that the concept, the basic precept of the strategy is progressive resource mobilization to enable relief, empowerment, and improvement in living conditions of the poor. This is the keynote of the human security strategy. This is the pin of social democracy, which we subscribe to and totally believe in. I've had to fight for years this value of social democracy. Let me conclude here. I've run out of 40 minutes and look forward to the distinguished panel for their very esteemed comments and views on this concept of human security, which I hope will eventually now replace the somewhat more narrow concept of human development. Thank you very much for your patient hearing.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pasha Saab. It was really somehow, encouraging in a way that we have got the human security index, but at the same time, like, it's a little depressing too. So before I invite our distinguished speakers, I want to announce that each speaker will be having only 5 minutes so that we can, because we are having a galaxy of people around this table and we want to have their thoughts as well. Now I would like to invite Dr. Hamza Ali Malik, who is the director at United Nations Economic and Social Commission on Asia Pacific, Thailand, to give your reflections on the book. So Dr. Hamza, as you are working on similar issues internationally, I would like to ask you, if you can relate your experience, the concept of human security in international perspective. Thank you so much. Jo aapko easy lage.
Let me start here. Thank you very much. I thought I was down the list. Dr. Ali is going to start first. Absolute pleasure here, honestly, in the company of Dr. Pasha and Dr. Ali in particular. They are mentors, seniors. As students, we have read Dr. Pasha before. I had the privilege of working with him in State Bank for a few years. My teacher who taught me monetary economics is sitting across the table. So it's indeed a genuine honor and pleasure to be here today and speaking here. Thank you very much, FES, for inviting and the opportunity to share my thoughts. I'm going to share some very broad thoughts in 5 minutes only. The And they are in the spirit of trying to make sure this work continues, not just one-off conference presentation, a publication of the book, and people move on. That's the spirit in which I'm trying to frame some broad issues, which hopefully will be picked up by academia and others. First of all, congratulations on pulling together this pretty much impossible task. Wonderful job. The range of issues that are encapsulated here are enormous, are serious, and you have brought virtually all issues under one framework, if I can call it. So that's a commendable job in its own right. Well, let's move to the critical part. Let me start with two broad observations. I won't have time to explain, but if you have time, you can go in detail. There are two birth defects Pakistan is, I think, facing, and we haven't solved those issues. We haven't discussed them enough. One, are we a nation state or are we a religious state? We haven't settled this question yet. And I'll explain why it matters for this issue of human security. I don't need to elaborate that point. I can give examples, but I think people are intelligent enough to understand the debate is still going on these issues. Number two, in terms of our governance system, do we have a civil system or do we have a military system? It's not settled since birth of Pakistan. This is the context in which we talk about charter of economy and other ideas. But if these core fundamental issues are not addressed, human security is not going to be promoted, is my sense over here. It's casting a long shadow on these concerns. So that's number one. Number two is a comment on how to take it forward, is essentially who's demanding this work? Where do we make sure the work sticks in the policy circles? That's going to be a major challenge, I think. There is a plethora of such research out there. In UN currently, for instance, we talk about thinking beyond GDP to promote sustainable development agenda. And there are, according to estimates, 550 plus such endeavors or indices that are available. Human Development Index is one. We just have Human Security Index now. OECD is promoting Better Life Index and so on and so forth. Countries have started publishing and using their own indices. New Zealand just published a well-being index, and they're using that in their policy circles. So that's going to be a major challenge, how to make sure this work moves forward. And it's demanded by policymakers. That particular part is important if you want to connect it with the policy ideas. Otherwise, it's an excellent research endeavor. I hope policymakers pick it up from here. I hope researchers dissect it and elaborate it further. But I think what Dr. Pasha's desire, after hearing him in particular, is that policymakers pay attention at the end of the day. So who is taking it up? At the end of the day, who's going to be responsible for delivering or accountable for improving these indices over time? How are we going to generate the data? There's going to be a policy fatigue already. Governments have committed to pursue 2030 agenda and many other global agreements on climate change and so on and so forth. Why should they take this particular index up? So there has to be a buy-in from the policymakers of Pakistan. Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Planning, I don't know. They don't even know actually if it exists probably. I hope they do. Then on just small point in terms of time on the technical part, and I won't elaborate, I'll just share one example. On the index itself, there are always problems with indices, especially when you put together such a comprehensive range of issues in one index. Just to give you one example, defense expenditure as a percentage of GDP. You put in the book as a plus sign, which means more defense spending means better human security. I disagree. I think the policy implication is put more money for defense so we can have better human security. I don't think so that's the overall intention, but that's the challenge when you get into the specifics of indices. I'll argue, in fact, even more that more defense spending over 70 years has actually contributed to the debt problem or external vulnerability, which is making us on the brink of the default. So this is one example, how you interpret the indices. There are many other such examples that can be put forward. 2 more minutes. Policy messages. This is interesting. We can have a whole seminar on that one. Default. And you use a very strong word, God forbid the country defaults. I'll frame the question differently, just for food for thought. What is the cost Pakistan has paid for not defaulting? In many ways, have we not really defaulted already? If you're in a continuous IMF program since 1988, what does it tell us? On technical definition issues, we're not defaulted. But for all practical purposes, we have. We are in an ICU for 30 plus years. So I don't think so we should promote, God forbid we should default. I think we should really, and this is a good way to start the conversation, let's figure out the cost the country has paid to try and stay afloat. You mentioned many variables, the cost we have paid to bearing high inflation, for instance, or many other problems. We have virtually lost independence of policymaking in many ways. We have lost strength of our institutions to be able to come up with ideas that can take these kind of ideas forward, because we have relegated and delegated policymaking to external institutions who are bailing us out. So that's my view. Again, I said the whole seminar can be held on this one. Second point on monetary policy, on your default related policy messages, you identify, which I find a bit strange, exchange rate and monetary policy as the key solutions for avoiding the default or finding balance payment issues. I think they're symptoms, not the policy solutions. The core problem, in my understanding, and I may be wrong, is the persistent saving investment gap in the country, led by public sector dissaving. Our original sin is, and you allude to that later on, is a serious lack of fiscal space to be able to do any decent development work. That is the core of the problem. In an accounting sense, if you continue to have this savings, you are going to have serious balance of payment problems. So monetary policy or interest rate, exchange rate are just going to show that the patient is suffering from fever, but they're not the solution to try and find things, or they're not the main solution, they're part of the solution. 1 minute, 30 seconds. Last point, and I want to close where I started off with. I think it's extremely important that either Dr. Pasha or his collaborators or the researchers collaborate with social scientists now going forward. This is an economist's version of human security. I think we need to collectively, academia here, need to involve with sociologists, with anthropologists, with political scientists, with labor rights lawyers, try to bring elements that are not there. There are many examples, the indices. Inequality is a very income-oriented index over here. There is no indication of exploitation, for instance. It's mentioned, but no indicator is there. Freedom of fear. We have a freedom. Do we have a freedom to even speak in this country? At times, you look over your shoulders when you mention the word civil-military balance, to be honest. There's no indicator of that. That's not an economist perspective that's going to be there. There are going to be other social scientists who can bring that collaboration. Last word, Charter of Economy is not going to be developed outside the framework of which the country operates. And the two problems I referred to at the beginning are the source of the are the problematic framework. We need to settle those issues alongside developing a charter of the economy. If we try talking about economy, a charter of the economy, we may have a lot of good ideas. They're going to stick. They're not going to go far. We're going to keep experiencing persistence of our challenges going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hamza. And I'm sorry I was, rushing because Dr. Zainab koi de de. Thank you. And you're definitely right, that Pakistan's economy has been in ICU since last many decades. But then at the same time, what is the cost Pakistan has paid for not, being default? So this is what our colleagues at STPI can, continue the dialogue. Now I would like to invite Dr. Zainab Jahan, Chairperson, Department of Economics, Fatima Jinnah Women University, to give her general reflections on the book. Thank you.
Gee, thank you so much. Once I got the book and the title, it was so captivating for me. But then I thought that we cannot expect less than this from Dr. Pasha. So I would definitely second Dr. Hamza that it is an excellent work. And I think at this time, we need such kind of work to have our own data sets and our own computations and work so that we can build or expand our research base. I'll make my point in two ways. One is the researcher's perspective and the other is from the policy perspective. So as far as I'm as a researcher is concerned, so again, it's an excellent job done. There are a lot of variables and indicators that has been captured. 87 to be handled is very, very difficult. But the methodology is there. But what I want to say is that I would like to have more discussion on that, how the compatibility of these different forms of indicators are being tested or being verified. For example, there are income as well as expenditures. So normally we work on one of the dimensions and then we see that how it goes on. The other is that in the freedom of want, I would want to see that there is no digitalization or IT, because from the last 20 years we are moving towards a digitalized world, but there is no such indicator I could see. So maybe from that perspective. Then in the freedom from fear, again, I would second Dr. Hamza that there are more of the economic perspective, but I don't see the social perspective there to be taken in. For example, personal safety is not being defined, that how we define or how it is being captured as personal safety. Is it from the mental perspective or the physical perspective? So how to take on that? Then in the regional disparities from the inequality point of view, it's again the provincial income per capita differences, and then the development is also there. So I thought that there might be more discussion about the development, how it is being defined, because income ultimately becomes part of the development. So these are again some of the queries that came into my mind, but again, once we have the index in front of us, so we do think and talk about the indicators, that how to coordinate with all those. When I look at the policy section, in the policy section, I would be more, since Dr. Pasha has been to the policy making frameworks and analysis a lot. So the policy coordination with the index is more in a generic form, that I felt that the policy suggestions are more at the macro level, but the human security is more at the micro level that we see, and same as the indices has been, the indicators has been taken. So for example, one is the direct transfers, and we know that the direct transfers, they are not as much encouraged in terms of the capacity building, economic or social capacity buildings point of view. So if there are some, if there are some maybe more discussions about that. But overall, it made me really excited to have such kind of book. And of course, I will refer my students to have now work on the Human Security Index more independently and definitely confidently. Thank you so much, Dr. Pasha.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zainab. We would, on behalf of FES, I can commit that we would be very happy to extend this discourse in your university with your students. Thank you so much. Now I would move to Rana Kaisar Ishaq Saab, who is the Assistant Resident Representative of UNDP Pakistan. Dear Kaisar Saab, since human security, with its focus on protecting individuals from various threats, creates an environment conducive to human development. Further, the evolution of ideas about human development during the last quarter of century has been extremely fruitful, as Dr. Pasha mentioned earlier, and the introduction of National Human Development Reports by UNDP coincided with a historical moment of deep global transformation. And as a result, these have played a meaningful role in placing people at the center of global governance. Our intellectual product of this human development journey is the idea of human security. And good governance is a fundamental prerequisite of human security. This amply demonstrated in the Pakistani context in our study on human security in Pakistan by Dr. Pasha. So I would like to, we would like you to give us maybe your reflection on this study and shed some light on the, there's one chapter 9 about the index of governance, so which is being prepared by Dr. Pasha, and then you are also heading the governance unit at UNDP. It would be great if you can, share your reflections in the governance perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, FES, Dayosab, Honorable Dr. Hafiz Pasha, Dr. Aisha Was Pasha, colleagues. Thank you for this opportunity. Absolutely privileged and thrilled. Being one of the advantages of being a panelist was that I was able to have the access to this fascinating study. But today I thoroughly benefited from Dr. Saab's eloquence and the way he passionately pleaded the case for human security and human development. Of course, I come from UNDP. Dr. Saab, I have been part of your team, second-tier team when you were there presenting to the Prime Minister of that time, the inequality report, human development inequality report. We have also been benefiting from your various insights, articles, publications, especially for our development advocate journal also. So thank you very much for that. Like you said, we live in an interconnected world where well-being of individuals and society's overall well-being are linked. So I think this nexus between this holistic approach that Dr. Saab takes in this study of looking at how human development and human security can nurture conditions for peace, justice, and security. I think in that perspective, this is a very important addition to the conversation, this study. And I will agree with Dr. Hamza that, of course, it remains to be seen how much of this is taken up by the policymakers, how hopefully this informs the policy making process. Human development, as Dr. Saab mentioned in the study, focuses on building human capacities by investing in education, health, job creation, skills development. And then human security, of course, is about safeguarding individuals and communities from threats to survival, natural disasters, and also making sure their protection and their economic well-being. Coming from UN, I think what is fascinating is that Dr. Saab has taken this human rights approach at the start of the study. I think that's very important. This strong and concrete connection between human rights and human security within the broader framework of human rights. Human development enhances lives, and human security shields those key populations in need. I really like the idea of convergence of these three concepts of promoting development, protecting rights, and mitigating risks. I think these are really the tools for fostering peace and security. We can all agree it has now almost become a cliche that we are faced with four-pronged challenges. I will call them four threats to our human security, especially in Pakistan. One is, of course, the environmental and biodiversity challenge. Then political polarization, socioeconomic inequalities, and as well as technological upheavals. And I'm glad that this study touches upon that as well. And these challenges are now happening at a speed and scale that has been unprecedented in human history. Dr. Abdullah Dayosab, you referred to human development reports. These have over the years contributed and enriched the discourse on human development through its various facets: human security, governance, environment. So one of the 2020 report, the UN Global Human Development over 2022 says that this global turmoil has led to the unprecedented reversal in human development in 90% countries worldwide, posing a threat to human security. I would also particularly like to mention UNDP's Global 2020 special report which is titled New Threats to Human Security in the Anthropocene. And it highlights that people's sense of safety and security is at all-time low, and this was in 2022. In all-time low in almost all of the countries, including the rich countries, which have made more advances in human development progress than others. And to tackle this disconnect between development and perceived security, there is a call for new approach to development, one that allows people to live free from want, fear, anxiety, and indignity. And I think these are also the areas that this study, this book, should I say, takes care of. As the book highlights, governance permeates the diversity of these development challenges. Principles of democratic, equitable, inclusive, and innovative governance form the building block of a system that can produce efficient government where citizens have voice and agency, and there is a trust between society and the state. As the study highlights, the age of uncertainty, inequality, polarization, as the UN system calls it, the study underscores the imperative for inclusive and equitable growth, fair fiscal policies, robust legal institutions, highlighting their crucial role in enhancing the well-being of the majority. Very quickly, you talked about the indices. These really are quite fascinating, and I think on the basis of that framework of 5 indices that you mentioned, talked about in chapter 9, the World Bank's country policy and institutional assessment, Heritage Foundation's income index of economic freedom, TI, Transparency International's corruption perception index, economist intelligence unit's democracy index. These are all damning statistics, and Dr. Saab have all shared with you, so I don't need to go into that. But I think what is collectively underscores the multifaceted nature of the governance challenges and their pervasive impact on various aspects of national well-being. No wonder we are 142 out of 146 countries on the global gender gap, 162 out of 192 countries on the overall human development index. That is 2021-2022 report. Dr. Hamza, you mentioned that this study probably misses out on, or maybe not, doesn't define properly, doesn't tackle the civil liberties, freedom from fear. Freedom of expression. So I think it does take care of that through these. The one of the index is this democracy index, which has in its catalog civil liberties, and this study, I think, tackles that. So this index takes care of that also. Similarly, I think I'll skip in interest of time. I have made a lot of notes. Finally, I think what complements this study, just want to share you, UN Executive Committee in 2022 set up a working group on human security. Dr. Saab, you must be aware of that. Based on that human security report that I mentioned earlier, and it develops a framework of 5 Ds. I'll just read it out for you. To safeguard human security and promote human development. So first D is delivering on promises through better planning and monitoring. Second is strengthening data for human security, prioritizing dignity through proper inclusion, and focusing on dialogue and demilitarization for peace, and supporting digital transformation through greater connectivity. So I think that really is a framework, and based on this very nuanced book, which is full of rich with data and detail, I think this can really form the building blocks of this development paradigm. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Khaisar Saab. Now I would request Mr. Ali Khidr Saab, who is the Chief of Research, Business Recorder, to share his reflections on this book. Khidr Saab, when Pakistan, the panelists and some of the distinguished speakers, they were discussing that there will be a time when Pakistan will be moving to IMF once again, once the standby agreement is over. So how do you see human security in that perspective? But you are open to give your own reflections. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me here, and it's such a pleasure to see my teacher, my professor, Pasha Saab, recovering and doing those great work, and good to see friends like Hamza and FES and all that. As people have mentioned, Hamza and Pasha Saab both, that we are perpetually in an IMF program, and for the ever since, I'm doing journalism or analysis, we'll be very much part of the IMF program, and perhaps will remain in the IMF program till we live the way things are. I hope so. I'll be proven wrong in that, but if we don't really work on reforming ourselves, so we perhaps going to live in the IMF program like this. And it's not the IMF or anything that has an impact on human development or on the human security. It's the vulnerabilities within our socio-economic systems and the way we deal with it. That is resulting in those weaknesses of those indicators and indices and whatever the parameter you take, that well-being, HDI, HSI, GDP, or whatever the numbers, everywhere we are deteriorating, and we'll keep on that. And since we remain vulnerable, we go to the IMF. If we be able to keep ourselves out of it, and we will to answer those hard two questions Hamza posed about this, whether we are a security state or a nation state, whether we are a religious state or whatever. So those questions we need to, that this kind of a hybrid thing we have, where like you're launching a hybrid car because you have a taxation advantage, but your objective is not to improve the environment. So that's the kind of situation we are living in. So I would really think upon the kind of issues we faced in the past few years, especially in the past 5-7 years, and especially in the past 1.5-2 years. I think the Pakistan is getting poorer, and it's likely to stay poor going forward. So that's my big concern. I mean, the Pakistan has shown some indicators and all that, but the kind of inflation we faced and the kind of unemployment we are having, and the kind of growth trap we are in because of the external vulnerabilities, it's very hard to come out of that, and that's people are likely to remain poor. If you see the indices on the education, Pakistan, the second most kids out of the school, and then there's a dropout level very frequently from the primary to secondary, and even if we're producing good higher secondary, then we don't have higher education and all that. In technical skills and all that, we're really deteriorating on the productivity. And when you're deteriorating the productivity, the saving investment gum is naturally going to come over there, and you're going to have those balance of payment crisis. And then the size of the government, which never remain a concern for everyone and all that. So that's going to there. So the thing is this, what happened in the past 30-35 years, and this debate with the default, which Hamza talked about as well, and Dr. Saab talked about as well, is about, is not defaulting a good thing? Dr. Saab talked about the inflation of Sri Lanka at 72%, but the last recording of inflation of Sri Lanka is 1.2%. So we got through 30% plus inflation last year, and we're going to have around 30%, and the 25% expected this year as well. And so if we are not defaulting, so we are inflating our debt out. So that the debt to GDP is going to go down because we are going to inflate it out. And when we're going to inflate it out, we're going to increase the people coming in under the poverty. We're gonna suppress the middle class more. We're gonna enhance the inequality, and all those has an impact on those human security and human development indices. So we need to figure out, like I give you an example in the history of the Pakistan. We effectively defaulted after 1998. Dr. Saab knows that very well, and then we restructured our debt. And that gave us the fiscal space. Our fiscal deficit for about under 4% for a few years, and we almost ran a current account surplus in a year, but with a growth of 5-6%. So those were there the few years we got that because we got those breather and the income level been risen and all that, because we defaulted in a more appropriate way, that we restructure a debt. It's the default is mainly the restructuring of that debt. When your debt is unsustainable, restructure it. If you're a private entity, if you're a corporate, if you don't restructure a debt, you will remain a debt elephant. But if you restructure it, you can grow and stand again. So that's the same for a nation as well. So we need to decide what way we need to do, and we need to decide what are the priorities of the country. How inclusive the policy making would be. how inclusive the role of the government in it. And one very important point that Dr. Saab mentioned, that we have a poverty gap of about 2 to 50 billion. And but we have a spending of about 400 to 50 billion PKR. And so how to enhance is one someone here mentioned that we don't need to give them the cash handout. We rather have to implant the skill set and give away that they're gonna earn this. So that's how to work on that. Then why we always rely on the federal government, like madam sitting right there. She was running a federal government, and prior to that, she was running a provincial government as well as the finance side. So all the spending and all the power is the provincial side. So why not we let the provinces to do what they're required to do? Why not we let the third tier of the government to go in that way into that? So coming to the debate that I think we need to devolve different subjects, even we are a civil or a military or a hybrid, whatever the regime it is at the federal and the central level, that's a different behavior where you have a foreign policy and where you have a larger policy that what kind of a direction that. But in terms of governance and in terms of service delivery, the third tier needs to develop. So unfortunate part is that we have suppressed that because at the top level, you like those military to take the position, then the provinces get they get on the secondary level. So the provinces where they get the money and all that. So and the issue of the governance that has remained unquestioned and all that. So that's something which like to have these food of thoughts about. That is not defaulting a good thing. Shall we default as / restructure or inflate our debt out? Number two, how to reduce the poverty gap either through the cash transfer or we provide them some kind of a skill set to move them up. And number three, the role of the provinces and the third tier in terms of improving human security index. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Khidr Saab. I'm sorry, we are just left with 15 minutes in total, and then we still have to take some comments and questions from the House. Yes, yeah, that's why I requested Sajid Amin Saab once he checks his WhatsApp. Before we take our last comment or maybe the last remarks from Dr. Alia. Dr. Alia, when we talk about human security, and for the first time in national security policy, the term gender security has been used. And it was very interesting to see. I want to know your reflection on the book, but I want to also throw a question that since you have extensively worked on inequality, social protection, economic discrepancies, so how do you see the human security in that context? Thank you so much.
Okay, then I'm not going to answer your question because for that I'll need 15 minutes. I'm just going to, give my reflections. Firstly, I'm very privileged to be invited by FES and STPI to, get a chance to go through the book and give my comments. I think one of the questions that cropped up during the discussion was, how do we contextualize this concept of human security in our policy frameworks, national, provincial, etc., so that it gets more traction in terms of the specific measures that Dr. Pasha has alluded to. And I think it's an excellent labor of love, I would say, because it's only love of the subject and the data and the country, of course, that can propel such an exercise that has been undertaken by Dr. Pasha. And I found that there is this section on operationalization of human security, which really provides the guiding channel through which we can put into practice some of the pathways through which human security can be enhanced in our country. And let me just quickly, since Dr. Pasha did not really stress on it, and maybe that gave me a chance to focus on that. The 5 principles that he enunciates are people-centered, interconnected, comprehensive, context-specific, and preventive. I think it says it all, and I would refer you to page 6 of the book to read it in detail, since I don't have time. And then the conceptualization of the concept of human security, which is, I'll just focus on the 2 boxes that are there, which is reduction of vulnerability and eradication of risk. I think again that encapsulates all our constitutional obligations, all our international obligations in the form of the numerous conventions that we have signed with UN, beginning with Universal Declaration on Human Rights, which is being referred to, all the core ILO conventions that Pakistan has signed, being the only country in South Asia that has done it. Then the whole SDG framework, and the chief SDGs, who happens to be my student, also left the room. Otherwise, I thought that he should feel good about hearing this linkage. And let me just introduce the pathway through which I think this can be reinforced. Now, there is the emphasis on freedom from fear, freedom from want, and life with dignity in the conceptualization of human security. And one of the main components of human security, which I'm going to focus on, is economic security, which is basically threats to life and livelihoods. And in that, the subcomponent of employment is the one that I want to focus on, because I think that all of us will filter out our own areas of expertise and passion from this very monumental work on human security, because nobody can address everything that is in the book. And what are the threats to life and livelihoods? Unemployment, food insecurity, energy insecurity, and threats to dignity. Lack of human rights, inequality, exclusion, discrimination, etc., which also covers the gender inequality and the gender security issue that Abdullah was alluding to. And Dr. Pasha has very masterfully combine the concept of human development and human security through the economic growth nexus, because where are we going to operationalize this whole concept of human security if we do not have economic growth? And there is a bidirectional relationship. I won't say causal, because no tests of causality have been conducted, but better levels of human development are obviously they lead to better levels of human security, but then better levels of human security also lead to better levels of human development, which is what I want to talk about. What is human development? Basically, investment in education, health, skills, and addressing inequalities of income and opportunities. I think we also need to eke out the issue of inequality of opportunities in Pakistan, which has become very rampant. And of course, the whole concept of social protection is also embedded in it. Now, how do we connect it with SDGs? Just 2 more minutes. Goal 8 of SDGs, which says promote sustained, inclusive, and sustained economic growth through productive and full employment and decent work for all. So when we are talking of employment, Dr. Pasha is not only talking of the numbers, he's also talking of the quality of unemployment, because the whole concept of human security is embedded in the quality of employment. I mean, workers are working in the mines of Pakistan in very, very insecure conditions. So the indicator of employment and wages things might show that it has improved, but if we tease out the quality of work, then we will see that it is maybe work in very hazardous and insecure conditions. So that is where we need to focus on. And let me just finish by saying that Pakistan is also following a decent work agenda, which has the 4 pillars: employment creation, social protection, rights at work, and social dialogue. So we don't need pathways. And here I want to say that we only need a skilled approach to connect what Pakistan has constitutionally declared as obligations, what Pakistan has internationally declared as observations, and weave them into our national development and policy frameworks, as well as subnational frameworks. And maybe they're already there, but then we superimpose the concept of human development and human security on top of it, and maybe then we can get a push for this concept of human development and human security, which I think is the most important one for a populous country of 240 million with a 60 to 65% population of youth. So thank you very much, and I thoroughly enjoyed going through this work of which I call the labor of love again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saiba, and I'm glad that SDPI has been kind enough to give us some more time. Meanwhile, I'll request the IT team to play the message of Dr. Moeed Yusuf. He couldn't join us in person, but he has sent his video message. And meanwhile, we'll be taking a couple of questions and comments. You can start preparing your questions. Yes, I'll get back to you after this video.
Assalamu alaikum ji. First of all, congratulations to SDPI, the Board of Governors of SDPI, Dr. Abid Suleri, the Executive Director, Dr. Waqar, and all of you for putting together yet another fantastic STC. Bahut Mubarak ho. For those of you who don't know, I'm an SDPI alumnus. I worked at SDPI some of my formative years of my early career. I spent more than 3 years at SDPI, and it's something once in you, it never leaves you. So this is really home for me, and I'm even more delighted to see how this institution has blossomed over time. Let me, on the topic, begin by congratulating my senior colleague at BNU, Dr. Hafiz Pasha. Needs no introduction, but the work that he's done on the Human Security Index is truly very, very close to my heart. So, Dr. Sahab, aapko bahut mubarak ho. Also on behalf of BNU, you continue to make Beacon House National University proud and visible, and we expect no less from you. So thank you for everything you do. आप सबको मालूम है कि national security policy पाकिस्तान की पहली first ever national security policy was released in January of 2022. Again, something that I worked on very, very closely as a national security advisor at that time. And if you look at the policy, in one word, the policy is human security. The policy is a vision that looks at Pakistan, and with civil and military consensus at the time, a clear decision was made that Pakistan's national security paradigm is going to be a comprehensive national security paradigm focused on an ultimate objective of making your most vulnerable citizen safe, secure, living with dignity, and prosperous. So this is the ultimate definition of human security. And if the goal is human security, the national security policy then went on to say that the core of this policy and vision has to be economic security. Why? Because economic security is going to give you the resources to spend both on human security and on traditional security, where we also need a much more resource given our threat matrix. So, to talk about the Human Security Index is the logical next step for me as somebody who looked at the NSP, worked on the NSP, and then thought about very deeply, given my job, how should we implement this? And one of the prerequisites for implementation is that we have to have a benchmark to measure it against. So this is not just another report or a publication by Dr. Pasha. I think this is groundbreaking. This is Pakistan's product. I would like to say this is BNU's product as much. I want to congratulate FES for supporting something like this. I think this is a great start. We have something by virtue of which we can benchmark, we can introspect, and we can see that theek hai, as NSP ban gayi, ek policy ban gayi, but then the implementation part, how close are we to where we want to get? And that actually is ultimately what will define whether the NSP is successful or not. So I know there's been a lot of work that's gone into it. Meri khud Dr. Pasha se is pe baat hui hai, and we frankly have a plan to take this forward. So after this great initiative and start, how do we make it permanent? How do we make it really Pakistan's flagship, which the world should then look at and try and replicate? We want to make sure that we can build on this initiative to make this truly Pakistan's product that others in the world follow. I know there are other human security indices out there, but this is actually one of its kind. Ultimately, it's going to be contextualized to Pakistan, but others can build on it as well. So, we want to make sure this becomes an annual publication. This really rivals sort of the HDI, and for our purposes, benchmarks us as a country on where we are on that promise of the vision of the NSP, or essentially of human security, and making sure that each and every citizen in Pakistan is safe and secure in every sense of the word. So once again, I want to congratulate Dr. Pasha, SDPI, FES, and want to commit a role from and of BNU to make this HSI an even more improved and permanent publication from Dr. Hafiz Pasha and others involved in his team. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Now I'll briefly take a couple of questions. I would request our friends around the table to be very precise while asking your question or passing on your comment and remark. Dr. Aisha से हम शुरू करते हैं, फिर आपकी तरफ आ रहे हैं.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you so much. Let me just start by saying a wonderful effort, very needed effort, and in this day of age of 5th and 6th generation warfare, where tanks will not really win wars for you, it is this and provision of basic needs of life and satisfying your citizens, which will win wars for you and economic growth for you. Now, in the debate that we followed, and I see a section in your report on this also, the question about default. It's the reason I want to talk about it is that I've been living in sleeping default for the last 16 months of my life. And I will also say sleeping default because that was my dreams were of this, it really had them. The thing is that, see, you said that maybe default is not a big deal. We should have gone ahead defaulting, and that's it. Now the thing is that we have been avoiding default, but the wrong thing that hasn't happened, or the thing which was very important for us to follow up, even if we had defaulted, is that take the corrective measures, make the structural reforms so that the unviability of your twin deficits, in particular, the external financing needs, are met. So are we in a position as a nation to do that? The kind of reform that we've already implemented, I'm going to be a little harsh on here, the kind of reforms we've already implemented in this country have really hit the common man. We see this. Electricity, gas, and so what have you, cut back on social development expenditures, and so on and so forth. The reforms we haven't seen are those which are directly affecting some of the very important, powerful lobbies in this country. the kind of a change that we want. For example, if you want to curtail the twin deficit, let me talk about the public finances first, even though the fault is more related to the external side. On the local side, on the domestic side, you need progressive taxation. You need to tax the really powerful ones. Are we in a position, have we learned the lesson? Are we doing that? Are we ready to do it? We've been enhancing the indirect taxes. Where is the direct tax component in which the really, really big landlords and really big wealth owners in this country are being taxed? There is no political will, I'm sorry to say this. The other side is real curtailment of your economization on the expenditure side. Have you really made a big cut? What about pension reforms? What kind of a pension reforms have we seen in this country? At this stage, it's a burden which is not so much talked about, but is a massive burden. What about some of the other privileges? Let me also be explicit here, both on the civilian and military sides. Where are the privileges going? With number of plots and so on and so forth being handed over at the end of the service and so on and so forth. So where is this real will to economize? And then on the external side, to get more dollars, what is it that we need to do? We need to do real import compression and curtail those things which we really can live without. Are we in a position to do that? We brought in the beginning of the 16 months that we were in, a conservation strategy, import compression strategy, really targeting what we call the not so essential import items. Were we able to do so? I'm sorry. Even till the end of the 16 months, the only thing that we got is some kind of an initiative for shutting the commercial markets before 8:30. And I tell you the reality, when I mentioned this in front of the very important people, I got a response, oh, how is this possible? हमारे मियाँ आते दफ्तर के बाद 6-7 बजे, उसके बाद तो हम शॉपिंग जाते, उसके बाद तो हम घर की जरूरतें पूरी करते, ये क्या बात कर रहे हैं आप कि 8:30 बजे दुकानें बंद हो जाएं? This is the level of preparedness of your people, your policy makers, and the general public about structural reform. In these circumstances, how can we prepare the nation to accept and go ahead and do the changes that are required for us to, with default or without default, structurally change ourselves so that we can become more self-reliant and more self-sufficient, behave like a sovereign country where we can stand on our feet and get out of the quicksand that we are currently on. So a very important message that I have gathered in the 16 months of my being in public, policy making domain, the realization, of and the importance of making these kinds of sacrifices and making them yourself first before you impose it on the others is not there. And I might be sounding very critically negative here, but I'm sorry, this is what I've experienced and it's coming out of my heart.
Thank you so much for speaking your heart, Dr. Saiba, and those are very pertinent points to be noted. Now I would request our colleague sitting on the left and then Nasir Mehman Saab. Sir, apna taaruf bhi karwa dijiye.
No, I think no, it's working. My name is Rai Nasir Khan. I'm Joint Chief Economist, Planning Commission of Pakistan. To be honest, it's great work done. Hands off to Dr. Hafiz Pasha Sahab. Rightly somebody pointed out, you've been very passionate when you speak on media, and when you write as well very passionately as far as issues are concerned. Sir, my comments are based on your presentation. 2-3 points I would like to emphasize, if it's possible. You can add indicators like population we need to track, where we were 10-20 years before and where we are. This is one of the, I think, game changer in either way. it can make a big difference if we somehow we can rationalize our population growth. And I know in governance you would have mentioned decentralization. We need to benchmark as well. You know, in 2021, 2001, there was local government, strong local governments, but now with the passage of time, it has somewhere disappeared. We need to have, if possible, this indicator. It can make big difference rather than centralization. And you've been observing in Pakistan, we getting more and more centralized. And third, IT, as one of my colleagues pointed out, IT plus AI. We need to benchmark as well. These IT and AI can make big difference when it comes to productivity and our exporting more things. I mean, 2-3 quick comments. As far as what Dr. Hamza pointed out, there is confusion. When it comes to constitution and our initial leaders, there is no confusion. This is a nation state. This is a secular state. Our leaders were secular. Even most of framers of Constitution of 73, they were liberal and secular people. And this I wanted to emphasize. There's no confusion. But I understand what you alluded and what should be alluded to. As far as last comment, statistics. This is misleading. As far as Sri Lanka, Mr. Khizar, look, you pointed out in Sri Lanka, the inflation has drastically come down. It's a base issue. Even on the basis of 72 in previous year, this growth is a huge growth, 1.2 or 2%. Thank you.
See, quickly. Thank you.
All right, I don't enjoy freedom from fear of the moderator, so I'll be very brief. Thank you, Dr. Pasha. My compliments to you and the FES. Couple of quick comments and question. One, that I was trying to look around if there are any indicators that focus on the crime against women. I'm talking of suppression of half of the population and the crime and the fear that the religious minorities are facing in this country. Has that been incorporated? Second, perhaps a comment. While you rightly mentioned about the regional disparities, I think if you delve a little more, disparities there at intra-provincial disparities are also very stark as you go into rural and urban gaps and gaps around the income levels. So that could be further starker. I belong this, but again, out of that fear of moderate, I stop it. Thank you.
I will very kind. Unfortunately, we have only 5 minutes left, and because we'll be having a second session, so we can have like talk with Dr. Pasha during the lunch break. Oh, sorry. Okay.
I must say that this has been a remarkably unusual session, and I can tell you that the feeling I had listening to particularly the commentators and the discussions was the richness of the discussion. I must say, I feel truly complimented that this book led to such a diversified, rich, and deep responses. Thank you all for a superb set of responses. And I hope there is somebody in FES who has been taking notes very carefully. And we will want to ensure that in a subsequent work, many of these ideas are operationalized to the extent possible. Let me conclude by saying that, you know, one way of dramatizing perhaps to get this concept going through will be to highlight in the short run what are the most vulnerable threats to human security. I think we have to have the courage to highlight this. Needless to say, almost everybody talks about the implications and the costs or the benefits, interestingly, of default. And that has to be highlighted. What really will be the consequences of Pakistan having to move towards that kind of a situation? The costs and benefits down the road. The other 2 or 3 threats which worry me. And I speak from my heart, and thank you for saying that it was a labor of love. It truly is. We have spent our lives working for Pakistan, without expecting any returns, because we love our country. One threat that I need to highlight. Burgeoning youth bulge. Do you know, one of my students who's doing very advanced work, and I have been working together today, and this is a shocking number, 18 million youth of Pakistan are idle, I-D-L-E, which means that there are this vast number of youths who are in the labor force but are unemployed, and unemployment rates of graduate youth are in the range of 25 to 30% today. And then there is that group of youth who have given up, have lost hope in the system and given up and, in a sense, retreated. Believe me, and because of our love for our country, we do not want to see an Arab Spring in Pakistan. There is a real risk with a burgeoning youth population that there could be a widespread negative move by the youth. So that to me is a possible threat to human security. And lastly, I would like to talk about आपने खोल दिए दरवाजे बातचीत के, Hamza. When you said that Pakistan has to take a decision as to whether it will remain a hybrid state or transit towards a true social democracy. मैंने पाकिस्तान को तकरीबन 40 साल उस पर रिसर्च किया है. मेरी आप सबसे गुजारिश ये है, हमारे लिए फ्यूचर में ये हाइब्रिड निजाम नहीं चल सकता. मैंने अपने आंखों से देखा है, करीब से देखा है. Until and unless the people get rights and we have a political process which leads to fair and clean elections and to a government which has the people's mandate and can thereby take some difficult decisions. And we do, as rightly highlighted, have a system of government which is not over-federalized, but has 3 levels at least, if not 4. If these things do not happen, in the fag end of my life, let me humbly submit that the future is not going to be so positive. So thank you all for an outstanding session of reactions and ideas presented by all of you. And finally, I want to place on record our thanks to extraordinarily neutral and committed institution called Frederick Ebert Stiftung. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Pasha Saab. Since I have eaten up the time of Dr. Sajid Amin, so I'll quickly say thanks to you. It was really a pleasure working with you on this report, and it was personally I learned a lot while working on this report. Thanks to the distinguished speakers, our guests, participants, और मेरी ज़ाती तौर पे माजरत करता हूं तमाम साथियों से जिनके सवाल हम नहीं ले सके. आखिर में एसटीपीआई के दोस्त कुछ प्रेजेंट करना चाह रहे हैं हमारे डिस्टिंग्विश्ड स्पीकर्स को कुछ पब्लिकेशंस. सो प्लीज distinguished speakers are requested to join us here on the front side of the banner. The SDPI is going to present you something. Yes. Dr. Sajid Amin साहब आप भी आ जाएं please.
Finally found the meeting.
Yes. The gift prize is 9.